Nobody prepares you for the moment you realize your family has a return policy on love. Carol passed on a Friday in March. Ovarian cancer. 4 months from the first symptom to the last breath, which sounds like enough time but isn't. It's enough time to sit in waiting rooms and learn the names of nurses and watch someone you love become someone who needs help walking to the bathroom. It's not enough time to say half of what you meant to say over 31 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings and grocery runs and falling asleep on the couch during the same movie you've both already seen twice. She was 56. She had a list on her phone called Before We're Too Old, and near the top of it was a road trip up the Pacific Coast Highway. We never took that drive. I'm telling you that so you understand the size of what I was left holding. Not a gap in my calendar, not an empty seat at dinner, a hole in the center of everything that had ever made sense. Carol was the architecture of our life. She remembered which of our grandkids was allergic to peanuts. She knew that our neighbor's dog got loose every Thursday and needed to be walked back. She kept a running list of who in the family had a birthday coming up, and she always called. She was the one who held the threads. When she died, I didn't understand yet that I was holding nothing. Welcome to Dad's Calm Revenge. Grab something to drink and settle in, because every story on this channel is about people who finally decided their peace was worth more than their patience. Subscribe before we get started so you never miss one. I should introduce the cast. Every story has one. Tina is my older daughter. 42 when Carol died. Lives 35 minutes away with her husband, Owen, and their 3 kids. She works in hospital administration, which means she knows more than most people about how to move through hard things efficiently. She applies that skill mostly to her schedule. Nate is my son. 38. Lives in the same metro area, maybe 20 minutes from my front door. He's in sales, does well, drives a truck that's too big for the city. He has a girlfriend named Becca, who I've met exactly 4 times, and Lorraine is Carol's sister. Not my family by blood, but family by 20-plus years of Thanksgivings and shared concern over Carol's health when it mattered. Lives 45 minutes out. Close enough. That's the circle. 3 people within reasonable distance. 2 of them, my own children. Carol died and they showed up to the funeral. Of course they did. There was catering and a reason to grieve openly, and the social structure of grief that tells everyone what to do for a weekend. Tina organized everything. She was efficient about it in the way she was efficient about everything. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, I'm saying it as a fact. Nate stood next to me and didn't know what to do with his hands. Lorraine cried loudly and properly, and then drove home Sunday evening. Before she left, Tina put her hand on my arm and said, "Dad, you don't have to do anything alone. We're here." I believed her. I didn't know yet what here meant. The first month, I fixed things. This is what I did with grief. Carol had kept a running list of small repairs around the house. The drawer that stuck, the gutter that needed reattaching, the bathroom faucet that dripped every night with a rhythm she'd somehow learned to sleep through. I went through that list like it was a job. I fixed every single item. I don't know what I was thinking exactly. Maybe that I could fill the silence with the sound of tools. Maybe that if I kept her list alive, something of her stayed alive too. When the list was done, I started cooking. Carol had been the cook, and I discovered I had a talent for it I'd never developed because she was always already there. I made pot roast and cornbread, and a chicken stew that turned out better than I expected. I called Tina. I called Nate. I called Lorraine. For about 6 weeks, they came. Not every time, but often enough that the house felt like something. Nate ate whatever I made and said it was good. Tina brought the kids twice and let them run in the backyard. Lorraine came over on a Sunday and sat at the kitchen table and talked about Carol the way nobody else would. Not around the edges, but directly, with specifics. She was so stubborn about the wrong things, Lorraine said, laughing through tears, and I laughed too because it was true, and because laughing felt like being allowed back into something I thought was closed. That was October. By January, the visits had thinned. Not dramatically. I want to be precise about this because the pace of it matters. It wasn't that they stopped. It was that they slowed. Tina started having conflicts on weekends. Nate started texting instead of calling, and his texts were short. "Thinking of you. How are you holding up?" the kind of thing that technically counts as contact. Lorraine drove up twice after October, then once in December for Christmas, then didn't come again until April, and only because I had a minor medical thing with my blood pressure that Tina apparently told her about. That's the other thing. They started finding out information about me through each other instead of through me. Which means none of them were calling enough to get it directly. I kept track because grief does strange things to your mind, and one of the strange things it did to mine was turn me into an accountant of attention. I kept a note on my phone. Not to be vindictive. I want to be clear about that. But because some quiet part of me suspected I was going to need to understand what had actually happened here. And numbers don't lie the way things can. In the 12 months after Carol died, my 3 people called me a combined total of 14 times. 14. Tina called 6 times, which sounds like the most, until you realize 2 of those calls were to ask me to watch the kids on short notice. Nate called 4 times, one of which was to ask if I remembered where he'd stored a piece of equipment at my house from 2 years ago. Lorraine called 4 times, and one of those was a pocket dial she didn't acknowledge. 14 calls in 12 months. Year 2. I kept cooking. I kept calling. I drove to Tina's house once, on a Saturday afternoon, just to see the grandkids, just to have something to do with a day that had gone very quiet. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going up. I remember noticing that the basketball hoop in their driveway was new, and thinking that nobody had mentioned it. Tina answered the door, looking surprised in the way that told me she had forgotten, just for a moment, that I existed. Dad, we were just about to head out. They were not heading out. Owen was in the kitchen in a t-shirt, and there was a football game on in the background. That's fine, I said. I was just nearby. I lived 40 minutes away. I drove home and ate leftover stew and watched a documentary I didn't absorb and went to bed early. Year 2 became year 3. Year 3 became year 4. I became a man who was waiting to be remembered. I set the table for more people than came. Every holiday I planned around a family that showed up partially or not at all. My 63rd birthday, Tina texted. Nate sent a gift card. Lorraine called for 7 minutes, 5 of which were about a problem with her car insurance that she was upset about and needed to vent. I had a therapist during this period, a man named Dr. Peretti, not a family connection, just someone I started seeing in year 2 because I was not sleeping, and I had started dreading Sundays in a specific and heavy way. He told me I needed to express my needs directly, so I did. I sat down with Tina, year 4, spring. I said, Tina, I need you to know I'm struggling, I'm lonely, I miss your mother and I feel invisible to my own family. She looked at me with real concern, the kind of concern that's genuine and still doesn't change anything. Dad, I know. I'm sorry. We're just so stretched thin right now. The kids' schedules, Owen's travel for work, you know how it is. I said I knew. She said they'd do better. They did not do better. I called Nate. Said something similar. He got quiet for a moment and then said, Dad, I don't know how to do this. Being around you, it's like, he stopped. It just reminds me of her, you know? I'm not great at sitting with that. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in 2 years, and I didn't know how to hold it. Part of me wanted to say, I understand. Part of me thought, I lost her too, Nate. Every day I wake up and lose her again and I still answer when you call. I said, I know, son, I get it. But I didn't call back that week. Something in me was getting tired of being the one who reached. Year 5. Lorraine asked me for money. Not a large amount, $6,000. But she asked in the way that people ask when they've been calculating whether to ask for a while. Her furnace had gone out in December and she'd put the repair on a credit card and the interest was eating her up. I gave it to her. Of course I gave it to her. She was Carol's sister. She was the closest thing to Carol I had left. She paid me back. I'll give her that. 18 months later, in 3 installments. But during those 18 months, she called regularly. She came over twice. She sent a card on my birthday with a handwritten note. The month the last check cleared, she called to say the debt was settled and thank you so much. That was in August. By November, she hadn't called again. I am not saying she did this deliberately. I'm saying it doesn't matter whether it was deliberate. Year 6. Nate asked if he could store some things at my place while he and Becca looked for a bigger apartment. Furniture, boxes, his old road bike. I said yes. He brought everything over on a Sunday, and it was the most time we'd spent together in over a year. He stayed for dinner. We watched a game. It was the closest thing to normal I could remember. He found the apartment 3 months later. He picked up his stuff on a Tuesday while I was out. I'd left the garage code and texted me afterward. Got everything, thanks Dad. OEU one. The one never came due. Year 7, I turned 65. I made a real dinner. A proper one. The brisket Carol used to make for occasions, her recipe card photocopied, and taped inside a cabinet door where it had lived for 15 years. I called Tina and Nate 3 weeks ahead. I told Lorraine 2 weeks ahead. I said, come for dinner, not a party, just dinner. My 65th. Tina said she'd try. Nate said absolutely. Lorraine said she'd be there. On the evening of my birthday, I set 4 places at the table. I turned the oven on at 4. The brisket went in at 4:15. Nate texted at 5:45. Dad, I'm so sorry. Something came up with work. There's a situation I can't get out of. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Tina called at 6:10. Dad, the kids are both sick. I can't leave them with Owen and come alone. It just doesn't feel right. I'm so sorry. Lorraine didn't call. She texted at 8:17, after the brisket had been done for an hour. Happy birthday, thinking of you. Sorry couldn't make it, crazy week. I sat at the table with 4 place settings and ate alone. The brisket was very good. That almost made it worse. I thought, Carol, what do I do? She didn't answer. She's been gone 7 years. But I waited like I always wait. The way you wait when the answer is already forming, and you're just not ready to let it. Then I cleared the table. Then I washed the dishes. Then I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I didn't make a decision that night. Decisions like this don't arrive all at once. They gather, the way weather gathers. You can see it coming from a distance, and you keep thinking it might turn, and then one morning you walk outside, and the sky is a different color, and you understand that something has already changed. Over the next few months, things moved slowly, and then all at once. I called a real estate agent. Not a local one, someone from a firm 2 towns over that Carol had mentioned once when our neighbors sold their house. I had the house assessed. The house we'd lived in for 23 years, where Tina and Nate grew up, where the kitchen still had Carol's recipe card taped inside the cabinet door, where I had spent 7 years cooking dinners that mostly ended up in the refrigerator. The assessment came back at $380,000. I said, list it. She gave me the look people give when they think you might regret something. Are you sure? Have you thought about? I've thought about it for 7 years, I said. List it. It sold in 19 days. Young couple, early 30s, 2 dogs, just engaged. They wanted to close in 6 weeks. I said that worked. While it was in escrow, I made the other moves. I had a financial advisor, past tense after this, who managed the retirement accounts and the proceeds from Carol's life insurance policy, which I had not touched in 7 years. I moved everything into accounts with a different institution, in a different state, not to hide anything. Everything was legal and above board. But I was about to become a person who didn't need to be easy to find, and I had learned from 7 years of practice that the hardest thing about disappearing isn't the logistics. It's allowing yourself to want to. I got a new phone number. I didn't give it to Tina or Nate or Lorraine. I canceled the landline. I closed the Facebook account Carol had helped me set up in 2014, which I had kept running for years because shutting it down felt like one more small extinction. I shut it down. I found a place to live, not nearby, not within an hour of anyone who knew my name. A small rental house in a town called Ridgemont, about 3 hours northeast, situated between a state forest and a river that people drove up from the city to fish on weekends. 2 bedrooms, a covered porch, a town where people minded their own lives without making a project of it. I packed what was real. Carol's photographs, the quilt her mother had made, the cast iron skillet that had been in her family and was now in mine and would stay that way. My books, my tools, my good winter coat. I left the furniture. I left the dining room table with the 4 chairs. I left the extra plates. On the last morning, I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen a long time. I took the recipe card off the cabinet door and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I locked the front door, left the key in the lockbox for the agent, and drove north. Ridgemont sits at the edge of the state forest where it opens up toward the river. In the fall, the whole ridge turns color and people slow down on the county road just to look at it. I didn't know that when I moved there. I found it out on a Tuesday morning in October, driving back from the hardware store, and I pulled over and sat there for 10 minutes looking at it. It was the first time in 7 years I'd been stopped by something beautiful instead of something quiet. I unpacked. I hung Carol's photographs. I put the cast iron skillet on the stove where it belonged. I slept 8 hours the first night without waking up at 3 in the morning, with that specific variety of loneliness that lives inside a house full of memory. I didn't know that was possible anymore. The first week I kept almost reaching for my phone to call people who wouldn't call back. Old muscle. You build a habit over 7 years and it doesn't dissolve overnight. The habit I'd built was reach toward. Keep reaching. Don't stop reaching. I had reached until my arms were sore, and my hope had gone quiet, and now the reaching had nothing to grab onto, and some mornings I didn't know what to do with my hands. So I went outside instead. Ridgemont has a trail system through the forest behind the ridge, and I started walking it every morning. Not the whole thing at first. A mile out, a mile back, then 2, then 4. By the end of the first month I was doing the full loop, 6 miles, through the trees and along the river where the water moved fast over rocks, and the sound of it was the most genuinely peaceful thing I'd heard in years. I'd forgotten that sounds could be peaceful. For 7 years, silence had been something that came after an unanswered phone. I found a hardware store in town run by a man named, I won't use his name, but he was about 70, had opinions about which brands of drill bits were worth buying and which ones were marketing in a box, and he was correct about all of it. I started going in on Thursday mornings for no reason. We talked about tools and occasionally about weather. It was uncomplicated in a way I'd forgotten things could be. I cooked. For one person. I know how that sounds, but there's something clarifying about cooking exactly what you want, in the amount you actually need, and eating it at the table without waiting to see if anyone else was coming. No extra portions in the refrigerator. No frozen containers lined up on a shelf like evidence. The kitchen was just a kitchen. 2 months after I left, Tina called my old number. Disconnected. According to what I learned much later, she then called the house landline. Also disconnected. She called Nate. He hadn't heard from me. She called Lorraine. Also hadn't heard. The 3 of them apparently had a conversation in which they each had to quietly ask themselves when the last time was that they'd actually spoken to me directly. I'm told the answers were uncomfortable. Tina drove to the house. I know this because she told me later. She pulled up to the address she'd grown up at and sat in the car for a moment and then walked to the front door and knocked. And a woman in her early 30s answered holding a baby on her hip and a mug of coffee in the other hand, looking completely at home. I think my father used to live here, Tina said. We bought it about 2 months ago, the woman said. Tina called Nate from the driveway. They tried, I'll acknowledge that. Nate called Lorraine. Lorraine called 2 of Carol's cousins. She was still in contact with. Tina reached out to a couple of my former coworkers from before I retired. Nobody knew anything. I had a new number, no social media, and had left no forwarding address. What they found was the shape of an absence, and nothing inside it. Nate apparently went to the police station to ask about a missing persons report. The officer on duty asked him a series of questions. Was there any indication of foul play, any notes left behind, any evidence of distress? And the answer to all of them was no. There was evidence of a man who had sold his house, withdrawn from his accounts in an orderly and legal fashion, and relocated. That's not a missing person, the officer told him. That's someone who left. Nate did not receive this well, I was told. Tina hired someone. A woman who describes herself as a research consultant, which turned out to mean she was very good at finding people who hadn't done much to hide. I had used my real name on the lease in Ridgemont, on my library card, on the sign-up sheet for a woodworking class at the community center I'd started taking on Wednesday evenings. I wasn't hiding. I was just somewhere nobody had thought to look because nobody had thought, in 7 years, to look very hard. She found me in the spring. About 5 months after I'd left. I came back from my morning walk to find an unfamiliar car in the small lot outside my rental house. Sitting on the front step with a coffee cup she'd apparently bought down the road was my daughter Tina. She looked like she hadn't slept much. She also looked, in some way I can't fully describe, like someone who was seeing something clearly for the first time and wasn't sure she liked what she was seeing. Dad, she said. Tina, I said. We didn't know where you were. I thought about 14 calls in 12 months. I thought about my 65th birthday. I thought about Owen in a t-shirt watching football while Tina told me they were just heading out. I know, I said. That was sort of the idea. She stood up. How could you do this? Do you have any idea what the last 5 months have been like? Nate is a wreck. Lorraine has been calling me every week. We thought, Tina. I said it evenly. When is my birthday? She stopped. What? My birthday, the date, Dad, that's not, what's the date? A pause, long enough that I could hear the river from where we were standing. March 4th, she said. March 9th. I've had the same birthday for 65 years. She looked away. How many times did you call me last year, Dad? I'm not asking to punish you. I'm asking because I counted. I know the answer. I want you to know that I know. A long silence. Not enough, she said quietly. The trees were still bare from winter, just starting to show the first green at the tips. I made brisket for my 65th birthday, I said. Carol's recipe. I called you 3 weeks ahead. I set 4 places at the table. You called at 6:10 to tell me the kids were sick. Nate texted at 5:45. Lorraine texted at 8. I ate alone at a table with 4-place settings and the brisket was excellent and nobody was there to eat it. Tina didn't say anything. I kept calling, I said. For 7 years I kept calling. I drove to your house and sat in the driveway because I was embarrassed to knock on my own daughter's door without being invited. I told you I was lonely. I told you I was struggling. I gave Lorraine $6,000 and watched her come around until the debt was paid. I watched Nate use my garage for 3 months like a storage unit and call it quality time. Dad, I'm sorry. Her voice was unsteady. I know we let you down. I believe you, I said. I believe you're sorry. Right now, standing here, I believe it completely. She looked up. Something hopeful moved across her face. But being sorry now is not the same as having shown up then. The hope drained. So that's it, she said. You just vanish and we're supposed to accept that? I didn't vanish, Tina. I relocated. There's a difference. You didn't notice for 2 months. She flinched. I'm not gone, I said. I'm right here. I'm having a conversation with you right now. But I'm not going back. Back to what? The house? The Sunday dinners nobody came to? The phone that rang and rang? There's nothing to go back to. I built something new. She looked around at the house. The porch, the trees. You seem fine, she said, and it came out confused, like she'd expected to find something different. I am fine, I said. That's not an act. She stayed for an hour. We sat on the porch. She told me about the kids and I asked questions, and it was something approaching normal. Before she left, she said, I want to be in your life, Dad. I want to figure out what that looks like now. So do I said. And I meant it. But I meant it the way you mean it when the thing you're describing is smaller and more honest than what you used to have. Not Sunday dinners with 6 chairs. Not the version of a father who stays by the phone. A phone call, real ones, planned ones, a visit that actually happens. A birthday that someone actually shows up for. She nodded like she understood. I think she did. I think understanding and doing are just different muscles, and she'd spent 7 years not exercising one of them. Nate came 2 weeks later. He drove 3 hours on a Saturday and showed up with a case of beer and the expression of a man who had rehearsed something and wasn't sure it was enough. It wasn't enough, but I let him in anyway, because he was my son, and because I was curious which version of him was going to walk through the door. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at Carol's photographs on the shelf, and I watched his face do the thing it did. The specific tightening that happened when something hit the part of him he'd been keeping walled off for 7 years. Dad, he said, I know I have no excuse. No, I agreed. He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. Every time I thought about calling, I thought about her. And then I thought about how much easier it was to not think about her. And then another week went by. And then he shook his head. I kept telling myself I'd deal with it when I was ready, and I was never ready, and now 7 years went by. I looked at my son, genuinely looked at him, the way you look at someone when you're deciding how much of your remaining energy you want to spend on being right. I believe you, I said. He nodded, relief starting to form. That doesn't change what happened. The relief stopped forming. Nate, I gave you access to my garage for 3 months, and in 3 months you came to dinner once. Once. After your mother died, you called me 4 times in a year. One of those times was about the equipment in my garage. I have spent 7 years being available to 3 people who treated my availability like it was a utility, like water, like power, something that would just be there when you turned it on. I am not a utility. He was quiet for a long time. The case of beer sat on the counter, unopened. So what does this look like? He finally said. Going forward, what are you actually asking for? I'm not asking for anything, I said. That's the part I need you to understand. I spent 7 years asking. I'm done asking. If you want to be in my life, show up. Actually show up. Call before you need something. Come on a regular Saturday for no reason. Remember which month my birthday is in. That's it. It's not complicated. Your mother did it for 31 years without being reminded. He was quiet again. Then, I miss her, I know, I said. So do I, every day. We sat with that for a while. I made coffee, he drank it. He left in the early afternoon, and when he got to the car he turned back and said, I'm going to do better. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hope he was right. Because hope is the thing that had cost me 7 years, and I was done paying on credit. Lorraine called on a Wednesday. I answered because she was Carol's sister, and I had known her for 30 years. And that still meant something, even if what it meant had changed shape. Raymond, she said. My name, I should have given it to you earlier, it's Raymond. Raymond, I need you to know that I have been sick over this. Absolutely sick. You are family. I know you feel that way, I said. I do feel that way. I love you. We all love you. I know. A pause. Are you going to forgive us? I thought about that question. Not the answer. I already had the answer, but the question itself, the architecture of it, the way it assumed that forgiveness was a switch that flipped, a box that got checked, a thing I owed because I was the one who had left. Lorraine, I said, I don't have anything to forgive you for in the way you're imagining. You didn't maliciously decide to disappear. You got busy. You got comfortable. You assumed I'd be there. The problem isn't that you're bad people. The problem is that being loved quietly and from a distance for 7 years doesn't feel like much from inside the quiet. Raymond, I'm not angry, I said. I want you to hear that. I am genuinely, completely not angry. What I am is someone who finally stopped organizing his entire life around people who had stopped organizing any part of theirs around him. That's not forgiveness or unforgiveness. That's just where I am now. She cried. I let her. I didn't offer reassurances I didn't have. After a while she said, What do you need from me? It was the first time in 7 years anyone had asked me that without me prompting it. Call me, I said, not because you feel guilty. When you're driving somewhere and a song comes on that Carol liked, when something happens and you think she would have had something to say about it, call me the way you'd call her, if you still could. That's what I need. A long silence. I can do that, she said. Good, I said. I hope you do. Here is what I want you to know about the life I have now. I walk 6 miles every morning, through the state forest and along the river. I know the trail well enough that I can watch the water instead of my feet. In the summer, the river drops, and you can see the stones on the bottom, and the light catches them in a way that Carol would have had to stop and photograph. In the winter, the water runs dark and fast, and the trees go skeletal and beautiful, and the cold is clean in a way that city cold never is. I take the woodworking class on Wednesday evenings. I'm not good yet. I'm working on it. I made a small side table that is technically a table in that it has 4 legs and a surface and will hold a lamp without collapsing. I put it in the corner of the bedroom. I'm proud of it, in the way you're proud of things you made badly, but made anyway. The man at the hardware store. His name is Warren. I've decided you can know that much. Warren has become the kind of friend I didn't know I was still allowed to have at 65. We argue about whether certain hand tools are worth the premium price. He is usually right. I am usually wrong and will not admit it. It is the best kind of ongoing argument. I cook for one person. It still sounds sad if you describe it a certain way. I've stopped describing it that way. I make exactly what I want and eat it when I want and wake up the next morning without the specific 3 a.m. grief of waiting for people who aren't coming. Do I miss them? Yes. Not the way I thought I would. Not the way I miss Carol, which is a missing that has its own gravitational field. What I miss is the idea of them, the family we were when Carol was alive and the house was full, and nobody had to be invited because showing up was just the thing we did. That family ended when Carol died. I spent 7 years trying to revive it. What I was actually doing was standing next to a closed door, knocking. I stopped knocking. They call more now, all three of them. Not constantly, but more. Tina called on a Tuesday for no reason, and we talked for 30 minutes about the grandkids and a book she'd read, and a renovation she was thinking about. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in years. Nate called on my actual birthday, March 9th, for the first time since Carol died. He said, "Happy birthday, Dad," in a voice that had something careful in it, something aware of what it had cost me, for him not to call all those other years. Lorraine called last month and said, "A Carly Simon song came on, and Carol used to sing it loudly and off-key in the car. Do you remember that?" And I said I remembered perfectly, and we laughed for 5 minutes about it. Is that enough? I don't know. It might be all there is now. The family we could have been, and the family we actually are two different families, and I've made my peace with living in the real one, instead of waiting for the other one to show up. Carol's recipe card is still in my jacket pocket. I haven't taped it to a cabinet door in Ridgemont. I carry it with me instead. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because some things aren't for keeping in one place anymore. 6 weeks ago I booked a ticket, Pacific Coast Highway, the whole thing, starting just north of Los Angeles and driving up through Big Sur and Carmel and all the way to Oregon if I feel like it. I rented a convertible because Carol would have wanted the wind, and I'm going to want the wind too. I'll stop when something looks worth stopping for. I'll eat at places I've never heard of, and I'll sleep with the window open, and I'll drive the long way around anything that looks interesting. There was a list on Carol's phone. Before we're too old. I'm taking the list with me. I'll drive for both of us, Caro. I'll pull over every time something is beautiful. I'll eat the best meal of my life. Somewhere on a cliff above the Pacific, at a table outside with the ocean below me. And I'll raise a glass to you and mean it completely. I'm not waiting anymore.